but everyone's going crazy and it's kind of funny. But the other one, it definitely reminds me of those multi-level marketing schemes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it
You,
is. Yeah.
like, but what you said on some of the podcasts makes exact sense. Like, this is not a scam, but it's going to attract like a lot of scams and a lot of scam artists.
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. This is episode number 21, Satoshi Pyramid and mining incentives. Today's Friday, the 4th of June, 2021. I'm here with Oliver, who's just told me that he's a Zoogler, which I didn't know what that is, but that's spelled Xoogler, and it means ex-Googler. So this is the heavyweights of the tech industry we have on on this show. You know, I had a good day at work, but getting to the end of the day, I was really feeling it. A lot of bugs to fix this week. Not a lot of new feature devs, so kind of some more of the boring stuff. But you know, got through it, right? Here talking about Bitcoin Cash, so best time of the week, pretty much. Um, so yeah, how long you been in cryptocurrency, or where did you find out about Bitcoin, or what's your story in that regard?
Yeah, so I remember hearing about Bitcoin at least in 2014, around the time I left Google, or 2013 Christmas. Because I remember going to New York and seeing an ATM there, that one of the
Mm.
Winklevoss or Winklevi had put in New York. And I remember looking at that and going like, oh, wow, like something's
Mm.
happening here. That was Christmas
And
13.
then what, did you get sucked into it straight away, or like some people see about it, they hear about it three, four, five times, and then they finally, get on board after like 2 years later, or were you just straight into it?
Yeah, honestly, like, yeah, for a couple of years there, I was just following it in the media, and there's an amazing story. We won't go into that. But just following that and all the Silk Road stuff, and then finally read the white paper, and then that was my sort of the thing that got me
Yeah,
in.
and now you've been big on it, right? You've made a web series that I've seen a bit of. It's pretty good, so we'll put a link to the description as well in that. So preaching the word, spreading the education of blockchain to the world, right?
That's right. But I'm especially, that one's definitely from a sort of it's aimed at people who are non-technical but want to understand how it works in like a clear, simple, no nonsense way. None of the sort of made up stuff that the
Yeah,
journalists
I
like to
think
do.
there's definitely a surfeit of that information because it's so Bitcoin has just been explained to so many people so many times in so many different ways that like I think it's hard for people the first time they hear about it, you literally hear about it five times and every time it's like, okay, they always say there's 21 million coins, but then sometimes they say there's not, there's only 19 million, and then sometimes they say it's on all these computers, and then sometimes they're telling me about Ethereum, and then sometimes so you really need to do your own research and find, yeah, some sort of clear explanation on YouTube or something like that. Because if you see any of these like news snippets or something, that's the only thing you know about crypto. You're confused as all hell watching that, like the fifth different explanation, which doesn't really make any sense. So yeah, I think people really need to get to the heart of the matter with more informative content, but they have to be proactive about seeking that out, right? So I think that's a big step in people's journey into cryptos when they realize, wait, I need to understand what the hell's going on here, and I'm obviously not getting the real story. And then they go out of their way and like look into it, right? So I've seen that. I've seen that pattern a lot. Right. So, first thing, as always, the price a little bit down this week for Bitcoin Cash, 674 US dollars, and one BTC currently buys 55 Bitcoin Cash. So, as far as the crypto industry goes, are you a price fanatic? Are you watching it all the time? Do you not care? Do you just YOLO in your money? How do you, how do you handle it?
For me, no, not interested in the sort of casino side of it at all. And that's something that I really want to tell people is that, you know, if you're into that, that's great, do that. If that sort of turned you off, the first time you heard about Bitcoin and now you're taking another look, there's a lot of interesting stuff to learn that's not about like what happened in the last minute with the price.
Yeah, I mean, it goes up, it goes down, it goes all around, right? It's a bit of a constant sort of Yeah, casino, exactly as you say.
That's
We're
exactly right.
It's going to be a bit of a theme in this episode, I think, in terms of the financial speculation. This show is not really, trying to give people trading advice or following, the latest hype or whatever. There's a million channels like that already, but it's kind of the most insane story that it's such a combination, right? There's no way it could be any other way. Really, crypto is just born in this crucible of financial speculation, kind of pouring in money, which a lot of it gets wasted or traded off, or people going bust or making millions or whatever. And then underneath it all, there's just this actual like revolution going on. And so, yeah, that's another reason that people looking at it from the outside, it's just impossible to figure out what's going on at any one time, because even if they take a couple months off and then they look back at it, it's like completely different. There's no rhyme or reason to it seemingly. So yeah, every week I check in on the Bitcoin Cash transaction count. So recently it has been on a bit of a dip, and funnily also so was BTC, but BTC seeming to recover a bit faster. So the BCH still got a bit of catching up to do in terms of spreading out the adoption around to everyone. So let me ask you then on this graph if you have any thoughts about it, and also how sort of regularly do you use cryptocurrencies now? If you're big on them, right?
Yeah, so just looking at this graph, it looks like Bitcoin's basically maxed out, right? Like there's only so many transactions it can do. So the price is pretty high. If I mean basic economics says, right, if the volume drops by a little bit, then the price should drop, and therefore that should stimulate more transactions. And I think that's what you're seeing there. Whereas Bitcoin Cash, like the transactions so cheap, I don't think it's so dependent on the price. I don't think it's near its maximum, right?
Yeah, so BCH has way more sort of upside, but if we zoomed out this graph, Bitcoin BTC basically capped at about 400,000 transactions, and every time it's in a weird situation because for a network to grow, a financial monetary network, a crypto network to grow, you want to have more transactions, you want to have more people trading with it. That's pretty obvious, right? But because it is capped in that way, the network benefits when people stop using it, because if it's at capacity, the only lever is that the fees increase and then less people use it, so it naturally brings it down, kind of like you were saying. But then when the price drops off, you see some people who are big on BTC, they suddenly start like, look, the fees are low, we're fine. And it's like, well, it's only, because you're going in reverse, right? Less people are using your network, for whatever reason, right? There can be all sorts of reasons for that. And now that's suddenly a win. But then if there's more people using the network, that's always a win. So it's sort of trying to like slice the bread and have it, both ways kind of thing. Whereas with BCH is just sort of like the more the better, since the end game is to try and suck up as many transactions as possible, and ultimately if you have all those zero point 0.1 cent fees, they can add up to a substantial mining reward, right? So yeah, I mean it's interesting to see BCH is obviously much less used, but not as less used as the sort of price differential would suggest. And we had, this is the other graph I check in on every week, is the USD sent across the network, which I also find a fascinating story to sort of follow, where BTC had sort of like, BCH had sort of flipped BTC. It was actually for 1 or 2 days in here, it was doing more USD sent across the network, despite being so much smaller, not having the brand name effect and everything. And then BTC just like shot off like a rocket and hit some all-time highs at 75 billion sent in a day, while BCH sort of collapsed off a bit. But BTC in the last week has just plummeted down to back under 20 billion, only 15 billion or so. So it's really only marginally ahead of Bitcoin Cash in that 10 or 11 billion range. So it's just crazy watching this graph to see how high the variability is in the BTC cent. It can be as high as more than 70 billion a day, and it can be as low as nearly like 10 billion. And to me, that sort of indicates that there's so much more of the fluctuation is just based on speculation or hype in the market. Whereas with the BCH, it is still obviously hype and it does fluctuate a bit, but it's also kind of growing this solid base underneath it because of that regular commerce that people are able to trade with it for. But that's just my analysis. Does anything jump out, on this graph to you?
No, that seems like a good summary.
Yeah. So, I mean, because ultimately the number of transactions can be quite misleading, right? Like we saw before, BCH did have, more transactions than BTC, but there was so much 1 cent tips flowing around on noise.cash, but it was still, maybe only 30 or 40% of the actual USD sent. So the real point at which BCH is really going to start crushing BTC, in my opinion, is going to be when BCH is doing more USD cent per day and more transactions per day, because then people will start cluing in and looking at that story and just saying, look, it's just a more efficient network. Like bigger blocks was the better idea, or at least that's my theory, and we'll see. Maybe it will happen that way. Maybe it won't. But since the start of this podcast where we had here, I don't know whether you could say that BCH is getting closer or not. I feel like it is, but that's a matter of perspective, I guess.
Well,
right. So we've got.
There's no way to know with like which of those transactions, like what those transactions mean, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like what do you call that? The company that will shuffle around your coins so you can get some anonymity.
Well, so they have like Cash Fusion on BCH. That's not a company, but there's other like coin mixing services on BTC as well.
Coin mixers.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I mean, you could imagine like if you want to mix your coins, it might make sense to switch it into one of those and then mix it around, do a whole bunch of transactions. You don't know how many transactions are like that and how many are just, Bob wants to buy a pizza, so we send some money.
Yeah, exactly. There's a really high, like these stats are the best we've got, and it is sort of nice that we do have them, relative to like a fiat currency where you actually nobody has any idea. Like people know, okay, the currencies are trading around, but there's no way to see like the USD, how many trades were made per day. Nobody has any idea. Obviously, yeah, the crypto stats are, they're indicative, but they're not like necessarily accurate or conclusive. Really, is the word I'm looking for. So yeah, but we sort of make do with the best we've got. So it takes a bit of reading the tea leaves, That's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Like no one knows what's going on with fiat because if I send money to you in Wells Fargo, like only Wells Fargo and you and me knows about that.
Exactly. And I mean, it's all spread out, enough between all the different banks and the Fed and cash transactions, yet nobody really has any idea. So I've always found it very interesting. One of the reasons that I got into crypto was that growing up, I would read in the paper about the Reserve Bank in Australia, and then obviously the the Federal Reserve and all this sort of stuff. And it just struck me as very like sort of mystical. It was kind of like, who are these people that just know the exact levers to tweak or something like that? Where you can look around and see trade going on at your local shop. Yeah, oh, I bought a chocolate bar. And you're thinking, who are these people sitting in their ivory tower that are just controlling the levers to the perfect amount? Like, what? That's nonsense, right? I don't know. That was how I always sort of found it. So I've just thrown in this slide at the last second for this show because I literally saw this on Twitter about 10 minutes before we started recording. And the story is that right now in Miami in the United States, there's a conference going on called Bitcoin2021. And this is not like an annual event or anything that I know of. Obviously, last year with the pandemic, I don't think there was a lot of conferences or anything necessarily. But somehow the Bitcoin community have got together and sort of set up this huge conference in Miami, which has, hard to tell at this stage from just some Twitter posts how many people are there, but at the very least, thousands of people at this kind of conference, and I'm very interested to observe this because in my mind, crypto is still quite small, or it was. I sort of think of meetups back in the day, like in the 2014, 2015 era. There's all these videos of Andreas Antonopoulos or Roger Ver talking to crowds of people, 50 or 100 people in a sort of warehouse or something like that, and everybody sort of raptly listening in. But it's kind of like this underground resistance movement type of vibe, and they're talking about, we're going to change the world and this and that, we're coming to take out central banks and banking the unbanked and freedom for everyone and all this sort of stuff. And it's just a complete contrast to now 5 or 6 years later with this clip. So I will edit in the clip right here for everybody to take a listen to. But basically, you and I have already had a listen to it, and it's absolutely crazy because it is like this tweet that I've got here says, once again, these scenes from Bitcoin 2021 are a repeat of the Las Vegas mortgage conference in The Big Short. Red flags everywhere. And watching it really made me think how true that is, that it's this kind of like every scene you've ever seen from a movie where there's some kind of scammy conference and somebody gets up and starts preaching to the masses. Like there's a scene of what's his name, Tom Cruise in Magnolia, right? That's another famous one of those, or The Wolf of Wall Street, or The Big Short. They all have these scenes where the person gives up and gives their big pitch, and there's kind of pounding music in the background, the big drums, and they come, maybe some fireworks or something. There was no fireworks in this one, but they walk out on stage, and here we've got Max Keiser, who is been a long time Bitcoin proponent and a very avid BTC only proponent. He hates Bitcoin Cash. He doesn't like altcoins, none of that stuff. And the same with Michael Saylor, the more recent entrant to the scene, who has been very avid about his support for BTC and BTC only. And they kind of come out and you can hear the crowd all jeering to fire them up. And there's a bit of like, fuck Elon, and we're not selling. It's like reaching this fever pitch of the Bitcoin global cult, where there's sort of this image of the two of these guys who are both very rich, coming out with their suits and like, everybody here in Bitcoin, we're all getting rich together and all this kind of stuff. And that's completely the opposite of the cryptocurrency message that used to be and still exists outside of Bitcoin BTC, in terms of, like banking the unbanked, like helping to lift up the poor, like being a community, but not a community in the sense of like some big financial scheme that we're all trying to get rich, but in the sense of we're a community that are really, bringing a social revolution, and we're opening opportunities up to people and stuff like that. But it's just kind of this really weird, like financial, I don't know, just watching it, it just was amazing to me. I don't know. What do you think of this clip?
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. It reminds me of two things. One was Steve Ballmer when he was running out on stage and going, "Developers!" Do you remember that like classic
No,
video
is
clip?
that from one of the Apple ones? Is that what you're talking about, or Google?
No, Steve Ballmer, the
Oh, right, yeah,
Microsoft.
yeah, yeah.
It's back from the maybe 90s or something, and he's screaming on stage, and all the developers are getting really excited, but he just looks like a complete fool. But everyone's going crazy, and it's kind of funny. But the other one, it definitely reminds me of those multi-level marketing schemes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah,
Like, but what you said on some of the podcasts makes exact sense. Like, this is not a scam, but it's going to attract like a lot of scams and a lot of scam artists.
yeah, and we're just seeing that because, to me, when Bitcoin Cash and BTC split, Bitcoin Cash kind of kept that vibe or that understanding that it is about, spreading it to everybody and, financial inclusion and stuff like that. And the Bitcoin crowd, especially once they had sort of cleared out everyone who was not, who was thinking more in that direction, they were free to just build on this, an echo chamber. A community just builds on itself, right? When you only have a limited group of people who have all one the same idea. And so then as more people came in, those people either drank the same Kool-Aid or they, left, they went into other cryptos, or they just thought cryptocurrency is not for me, right? And so the Bitcoin crowd has been growing more and more and more, but still maintaining this same kind of cultish vibe that we can see exactly here. And I made one of my episodes that I made was called the Bitcoin BTC bubble. I think, Bitcoin was maybe like 50,000 or something like that. And it was a bit higher than where it is now. And I just sort of said, look, this is not the same as all of the previous rallies where you could see there was a huge spike and everything. And each of those was built on more of the promise of Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash that is going to become the world currency and that everybody's going to be able to trade with and stuff like that. But nowadays, if you look on Twitter and you find some people who are big in the Bitcoin scene, it's this kind of stuff. It's like multi-level marketing hype, and they make these posts. Like we had the segment, whatever it was last week, a couple of weeks back, about Bitcoin pizza, where they don't even accept Bitcoin for payments. Because why would you ever want to spend a Bitcoin, even though they were celebrating the first ever spending of Bitcoin? And I saw there's one other guy, he had this picture where he had a picture of his new Visa MasterCard, like a debit card that he got, a credit card or something. He got the Platinum Edition or some bullshit like that. And he was like, look what I just got, hashtag Bitcoin. And I was like, what are you talking about, mate? This is your Visa card. It just, so I think this is all going to end very badly, but it's just an insane quirk of history that kind of this is the way it's going down, I think.
Which is the same that happened with when the internet first came out. This is all the exact same thing. Like back in like the early 90s, it was just like those nerdy tech people and the utopian guys, just like Bitcoin was when it was early.
Yeah.
And then you got like the people who are getting rich off pets.com.
Yeah, and they all came in and they built up this huge hype, and then it all, came apart. A lot of people, made or lost a lot of money. The government started getting involved, all these things, and then, I mean, obviously, then we got the real internet came out the other side of that, because in the crash, it just sort of cleaned the decks of all the people who couldn't hack it or who were building something that didn't have any value, and it sort of reset everybody's expectations back to how they needed to think about this new technology. But so everybody thought, okay, it's a bit of a bubble, but clearly there's something going on here. And I just get those exact same vibes here. So, I mean, I'm happy for the BTC community that they're having their conference. I'm sure a lot of people are having fun networking with each other and so on and so forth. But just from the outside looking at it, it doesn't remind me of the original Bitcoin at all. And I think it's gonna it's gonna end badly for the people getting fired up and we're never selling. And I mean, you do need some of that financial toughness and mentality in order to survive through crypto volatility in the long run. But it's just all the soul has gone out of it in terms of we're going to be a revolution, spreading peace and financial inclusion. Yeah, now it's just multi-level marketing. So. And this is all going on right in the background of this story that just came out as well, that Russia is apparently going to be getting out of the US dollar. For a long time, people have sort of speculated about Russia and China particularly as having to use the US dollar, even though politically their interests would not be aligned with that. So there's often questions about, are they going to try and dump the dollar, or whenever. I think there was a big story when China and Russia started doing deals not in US dollars, just using their own currencies, and various other countries like Iran and, people trying to sort of shift away from the petrodollar, and then the US sort of trying to bully them back into it. So there's this kind of big story of these big entities in the world kind of jockeying for position, right? So the new Russian reserves is apparently going to be 40% euros, 30% yuan, 20% gold, 5% British pound, and 5% yen. So, I mean, I think that's actually a fairly sensible breakdown from a Russian geopolitical standpoint. But it just kind of begs the question of when crypto, which was going to be this sort of upstart that kind of came in to shake this up, and that at some point Russia or China would sort of realize our currency is not going to be the global reserve, but maybe crypto is, and at least for us, that's better than the US dollar. But obviously BTC, who was going to be the flagship for that, has now headed off into the realms of being kind of unusable multi-level marketing scheme or something. So it's hard to see it kind of getting a groundswell of support that finds its way into this de-dollarization. I don't know.
Can I interject here? What is a Can you give us an update? Maybe not all the listeners know, and maybe my knowledge isn't the best on this. What is a reserve currency, and what do you mean when you say like Bitcoin Cash is going to become the world's reserve currency? Like, does that mean that governments are gonna use to hold to back up their reserves? Is it going to be like the thing we buy barrels of oil in, or is it going to be something that like everyone uses in every country to just buy, a chocolate bar?
Yeah, so for me, this is kind of interesting one, right? Because the reason I chose that sort of tagline for the show, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency, is because a lot of the Bitcoin Cash stuff is kind of branded as like peer-to-peer electronic cash and that kind of thing. And I didn't think that didn't really get to the heart of the vision to me. I think it's good. It does explain what's going on, but you could sort of hear like, oh, peer-to-peer cash, and you think, oh, okay, cool. So yeah, like maybe I could buy a hamburger with it or something like that, right? And I think that that's where Bitcoin Cash has its strong suit, and that's where I see it going. That it is traded every day on the street. But the point is, or the sort of the grand vision is that if you have people doing those small trades on the street for a hamburger, as the network effect of a currency builds, well, then that snowballs into companies buying some, and then governments buying some, and banks, and eventually world governments, right? And these kind of that was sort of the progression that I envisioned when I got involved in Bitcoin, and what I think a lot of people who were involved at that time, that's how they sort of imagined it. And since then, Bitcoin BTC, after the split, sort of went off and turned into this kind of like digital gold. That's their narrative, and that's fine because that sold it to some banks who feel like, well, we can hold some and sit on it, and maybe like in this portfolio, we can see here, Russia, they're going to have their 20% gold. Well, maybe they could have 5% Bitcoin that they never ever send anywhere. They just buy it, so they feel they've got their stake, and China does that, and whatever. And however many Bitcoin transactions there are each day, it would be like a couple of huge banks settle up a few billion, and a couple of major world banks sort of move it around, right? But the idea really for me is that can't be independent of what people trade day to day, because who on earth is going to be trading Bitcoin Cash with their friend or buying a pizza or whatever, and then is going to go to the bank and say, hey, can I send you some of this Bitcoin Cash, which I use all the time, it's very useful, to get some of your Vault BTC that is so expensive, the fees are so high, it's so unusable. Why would you ever trade your Bitcoin Cash into Bitcoin and then sort of have to trade it out? Like, people talk sometimes about having, oh, well, BTC is the savings account and BCH is the spending account. But it's not like that at all. And because once upon a time there was just one Bitcoin, and that was fine, because you want to save the currency that you spend, right? That's why people in the UK, they mostly have British pounds in their bank account because they can spend it everywhere, right? People in America, they have the US dollar because they can spend it everywhere. People in Australia have the Australian dollars because they can spend it everywhere, right? And so when I talk about the global reserve currency, I do want it to give people the sense that this will be the currency that everyone in the world uses, from machines for micropayments to individuals to corporations to large banks and financial institutions to governments, right? It will cover that entire spectrum, but it will start at the kind of grassroots level and grow up from there, rather than BTC, which was doing that and then sort of got diverted off. So now, even like we're seeing with this Bitcoin 2021 Miami conference, how many people there do you think are just casually swapping Bitcoin? Probably not many. There will be some, I'm sure, but there's probably going to be a lot more, everybody paying with US dollars to buy their beer, and then all congratulating each other on how they're so smart that they've got Bitcoin, right? But not being used as kind of a real currency, right? So does that explain it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, like in the world right now, we have the United States dollar is the reserve currency, and what does that mean? Well, it means the United States government is the biggest in the world. Therefore, their currency is de facto kind of become the most popular currency. It's what most sort of international trade is done, and because of the network effect, if one government is trading with another government, they might not even use their own currency. Maybe they use the US dollar since it's sort of neutral, and they can both agree. And the prices of things are set in dollars, right? The price of gold, the price of oil, all those commodity prices, even the Big Mac index, to some extent, is kind of tethered to the dollar, right? In countries like Argentina and Venezuela, where their currency is a shambles, or Zimbabwe, well, what do people use instead? They use the US dollar because they know that that's sort of reliable. And that's where Bitcoin Cash is, again, in my vision. Maybe this is just crazy, but we'll see. I'm reasonably confident, let's say, that in 20 years' time, that's kind of the situation we're going to end up in, where Bitcoin Cash is obviously not controlled by any government, but it will just be the financial underpinning for a huge percentage of the world trade, which you can use on the street and which governments use to settle up, large debts among themselves too. So I don't know how much you follow sort of global macroeconomics, but this is quite big. If the Russian government is officially like, well, let's pick up a bit more gold and get rid of a few dollars. All right, so we've got this little bit of news that came out in the BCH community this week, which I know we'll get onto it. You can ask me some questions about that you had about Bitcoin Cash, but it was just sort of fortuitous that you sort of mentioned scaling might be part of that question. And there's a really good article this week from this user Mtrix MTRYCZ, who I might try and get on the podcast at some stage, because they're a Bitcoin Cash developer and they do loads of really good work and research into how this could be feasible, right? What I'm talking about, where crypto as a whole, but Bitcoin Cash as the sort of dominant force, is used in transactions every day by every single person. That's obviously like millions, if not billions, of transactions per day, right? And so people have always wondered for a long time, how is that going to be feasible? And that's why BTC kind of forked off, and they became, they had their sort of approach in terms of sticking with 1 megabyte blocks and trying to make the Lightning Network work. That to date hasn't been really a roaring success. But for Bitcoin Cash, the approach was what Satoshi said at the original invention of Bitcoin, where he made several posts where the first question he ever answered in the first email that somebody sent to him and said, how's this going to work I think it was the first one ever answered, where somebody said, yeah, but how's this going to work at a global scale? And he sort of said, look, it actually doesn't really hit a scale ceiling. Like the quote, I'd have to find the quote, but it was basically about somebody said, well, given the current constraints of the internet, we can't handle this. And he sort of replies and says, look, if you scale this up to a world size, it might be about the equivalent of streaming a couple of HD movies, which at the time wasn't feasible. But he said, look, this is going to take 10 or 15, 20, 30 years to get to that size. And because we know technology is improving, at that stage, it won't be a big deal. And that's largely been proven correct, right? In the last 10 years, just as in the 10 years before that, and before that, and before that, and before that, storage capacity, processing power, cost of chips, all these things improve at a sort of exponential rate, so that even as people onboard onto the internet at these faster and faster waves, there's still always capacity for it. And so, because the technology is improving underneath it at the same rate. And so in this article here, we have this dev who did 1 gigabyte block. So right now, Bitcoin has 1 megabyte, so 1,000 times the size of that. And Bitcoin Cash has up to 32 megabytes. But this is 1 gigabyte blocks on a Raspberry Pi, which is, under a couple of $100, which could mean 345.6 million transactions per day on Bitcoin Cash, which is about 3.5 times the amount of transactions that are made in the US each day in 2019. So even right now, with not a ridiculous cost, right? Anybody who can afford $250 could go out and get themselves set up with the gear to run a Bitcoin Cash node that could, at the outer limits of what's possible now, do 3.5 times as many transactions as happen in the entire United States. So that's a pretty strong vote of confidence that we're moving in the right direction to being able to handle the whole world trade, right?
Right, right. But okay, so how do you know how this compares to, like, for example, Visa or Mastercard?
Yeah, they whenever they do these things, I think it's sort of like the Visa is about, I think it's like a peak of 1700 per second or something like that. Let's have a look here. Bitcoin Cash scaling Visa. Like this is the what people always do is this sort of comparisons. Here we go. The blockchain scalability one. So they have, here we go. No crypto. Okay, well there's all the debate that everybody has, but yeah, I don't have the statistics to hand, but I think it's something like 1700 transactions per second is yeah. Yeah, so let me see here. 256. Okay. Right. So today's nodes are perfectly capable of handling 32 megabyte blocks, roughly 240 transactions per second, and successful tests have been done with gigabyte blocks of 7,680 transactions per second. So I'm pretty sure I've read before that Visa is averages about 1,700 to 1,900 transactions per second, maybe, and it goes up to, at the peak of that, it's like 40 or 50,000 if everybody's trading at once because, I don't know, it's Black Friday or something. So I think that's kind of what we're talking about, is that if you're scaling in a BTC focused way with 3 transactions per second, and that's your cap, and you're never going above that in terms of on-chain scaling, well, it's just not really going to work out unless you did have some mystical invention of the Lightning Network that somehow made it all work. But in terms of just scaling up the amount of data, if you have the bandwidth to support it, and storage space is not insanely expensive, which as we've seen 15 years ago, right, getting a one megabyte floppy drive was like crazy stuff, and now it's like you can get terabyte hard drives, no problem, and in the future it'll be petabytes, or I don't even know what the one after petabytes is, right? So there's definitely a lot of info that I'm going to need to get on this. I've got some links that you can read about on bitcoincashpodcast.com. There's one thing that I have here where a guy talks. Here we go, terabyte blocks for Bitcoin Cash. So where this is something you might want to check out, where the guy explains about having enough capacity for 10 billion people, for 50 transactions per human on Earth per day for less than the cost of 1/10 of a cent of USD. This analysis assumes no further decrease in hardware costs and no further software breakthrough, only assembling existing proven technologies. So that would probably have some of the answers there to that kind of info.
So you can do 3 transactions per second with Bitcoin and 100 with Bitcoin Cash. That sounds about right. So I'm recording 32 times as much, or up to 32 times as much data on the Bitcoin Cash chain, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you just need a lot of storage. But if you're writing 1 gigabyte blocks, you are creating an extra 1 gigabyte of data every 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what that 1 terabyte argument sort of whatever it's called, the 1 terabyte kind of goes into, as to how like the bottlenecks are not actually in storage space, right? Because storage space gets fast basically. Things, when you like, relative to other parts of a computer system, like for instance internet bandwidth speeds or things like that, right? They improve, but they improve slower than storage space. Storage space gets better a lot kind of quicker. So obviously there is a cost, and I have mentioned this on the other episodes too. If you increase the cost of the amount of transactions and the storage costs and the internet speed costs and so on and so forth, that does mean that it costs more to run a node. And I'm not saying that you want to not have nodes or discourage nodes or anything like that, but it's more sort of an argument of going wide rather than going tall, which is that if you have 10 million people using Bitcoin Cash, well, that's a lot of commerce. So then for businesses who want to accept Bitcoin Cash, for them, if it costs, let's say, $100 a month to run a node or $1,000 a month to run a node, if you're Amazon or Google or Facebook, that's a rounding error, right? You don't even notice that. You're still going to run your own nodes and you're going to have the capacity to do that no problem, right? And but that only comes about, those big companies are only incentivized to run the nodes if there's people trying to trade with it, right? And they want it, or even governments, right? They could run 50 or 100 nodes each. Tesla, was running BTC nodes. They're now trying to back away from Bitcoin, so I don't know if they're doing that or not anymore. But that sort of proves the model, is that the end users on their devices, you don't need them to be running a full transaction history of the entire blockchain, in the same way that not everybody has an internet ISP in their house. You just have your device, you have your Wi-Fi connection, you connect to an ISP, and that connects you onto the rest of the internet, right? And that was the original model of how Bitcoin was going to scale, even in the white paper, right? Because it's like Section 8 is called simplified payment verification or simplified payment headers or whatever. Well, let me just pull it up right now. And Satoshi, even at the original design, already sort of explained that this was how it was going to work. Here, simplified payment verifications. It is possible to verify payments without running a full network node. A user only needs to keep a copy of the block headers of the longest proof of work chain, which he can get by querying network nodes until he's convinced he has the longest chain, blah, 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 blah. So basically, yeah, here we go. Businesses that receive frequent payments will probably still want to run their own nodes for more independent security and quicker verification. So even right from the original design, it was not, sort of envisioned that every single user on the network would run a node. Just that you need to have enough people running nodes that it doesn't turn into, obviously, a system of central control. So it's really a question of how many nodes is enough. But in the Bitcoin Cash way of thinking, it's better to have 1% of 100 million people running a node than to have 10% of a million people.
I mean, it's better to have a system that's useful rather than a system that's not.
Yeah, that too. That does pretty much sum it up as well. Because the people, there's no point having, in the Bitcoin model where people say, oh, but people won't be able to run their own nodes. Yeah, but people won't be able to trade it, and they aren't trading it, right? You don't see people just trading around Bitcoin. Even people who like Bitcoin are not, like with Bitcoin Pizza, they're not just trading in Bitcoin. Why not? Because it's too expensive, and it doesn't matter how many nodes they have. If it costs $5 a transaction, nobody's going to bother.
Well, what is it? Is it at the moment it's like $5 per transaction?
Well, right now I think it's down to like $3 or $4, but it's been as high as 60, right?
Right, so you can buy a Tesla with it. That's not a problem, but you can't buy a hamburger.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can't buy a hamburger, then eventually you're not going to want to buy a Tesla, right? And that's what we've kind of seen in terms of Elon Musk stopped accepting, Tesla, Bitcoin payments for Tesla. Why? Because it wasn't feasible, right? It's, even if it does cost $3 or $4, people were probably still using their MasterCard because that costs $0. And if the network is unreliable, which it is, that you don't know, okay, I paid $3, that still doesn't guarantee you get into the next block because there's that limit and maybe somebody outbids you, then it's unreliable. Then you're complaining about getting a refund and then it's a huge hassle, right? So it should just be cheap and reliable.
So Visa does charge 3%, I think, but if you get a reach, nothing, right?
Well, Visa charges the fees on the merchant side, which is where the advantage of cryptocurrency is that you want to incentivize the merchants by saying, look, it's no fee for the merchants, and the fee is on the consumer side, but in the Bitcoin Cash model, at least, the fee is so low that there's a consumer you don't even notice. If it is 0.1 cent that literally shows up on your bank balance as 0.00, right? It's effectively free. You don't even notice. You don't even think about it. So that's the kind of the model. So that then, yeah, for merchants, they can get an economic advantage by, instead of paying 3% to Visa or 5% to PayPal or whatever to accept payments, they just 0% to accept crypto. But that needs like a critical mass of people that want to pay with crypto first, right? Which is why the game plan is to try and get as many consumers as possible, yeah, interested in this idea, and sort of create a bit of a social movement of people that are holding, cryptos and willing to pay with them.
Right. Can I jump in there and ask you? There's a couple of reasons why Tesla might have stopped accepting that. Like, I heard the official reason is it's not environmentally friendly. Then you sort of, the reason you're giving is that, like, transaction fees, right? Or is that sort of the crux of it? Because I've got another theory.
Okay, what's your theory?
Well, my theory is that maybe it's just a fucking hassle for them, because you send money and, like, you send it to the wrong address, and now you've just lost $50,000 or something. You send send it there, and they don't know who sent it. They, like, money turns up in the transaction, and then they have no idea who it is. Like, what happens if, like, I try to send money and I'm late, and then the price of Bitcoin has gone up or down? So then they're gonna have to either, like, ask for the extra a couple of $1,000s or whatever. Maybe they're gonna have to refund me money. Like, I can just see so many things just being really manual, that someone's going to sit there on the blockchain being like, who sent us this money? What Tesla are we sending them? Like, and just being an accounting nightmare. You think that could be part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly what it is, right? Is that in the Bitcoin Cash way of doing things, people are surprised at how simple and quick and easy it is, because I think, and it's very unintuitive actually, but in one way it's kind of intuitive, where people hear about cryptocurrency and they think, okay, wow, it's this new sort of futuristic thing, but then they expect it to be really difficult. And then when, if I set it up with people, I get them to download a wallet at a meetup or something, and I send them $1. They don't have to sign up. They don't have to provide any information, nothing like that. And it just bing, it arrives like literally about as fast as my phone can scan their phone. And everybody's like, wow, that was fast. That was crazy. Like that, I've heard all about crypto and everything like that, but in under, 1 minute, you can be trading crypto from having nothing but having a phone and being willing to download an app. But on BTC, that's not true at all. It's the opposite, where for on-chain payments, because the fees are high and the network is unreliable, they can't accept those no confirmation trades, because you never know if that transaction's actually going to get confirmed, or if you've paid the right fee, or on and on and on, right?
With Bitcoin Cash, you can be pretty confident that you're going to be in the very next block, which is going to happen in the next 10 minutes, right? More or less.
Yeah, but it's even better than that, which is that it's in the white paper. It says it in here somewhere. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see it, but here we go. No, that's not it. Basically, Satoshi sort of outlined that here we go. Basically, it says somewhere in here, the payee needs proof that at the time of each transaction, the majority of nodes agreed it was the first received. So in the original model for Bitcoin, all the nodes, they listen for transactions, and then if somebody spends a certain amount and somebody else tries to spend a certain amount, they ignore that second one. So getting there first is kind of good enough. You do have the blocks and all the confirmation and all the mining and everything like that in case there is a conflict, but the default assumption is the first one is the real one. And then that's why, so you can send on the Bitcoin Cash network now, or the Bitcoin network back in the day, and if it only takes about 1 to 2 seconds for your transaction to propagate around to everyone, like sending a text message, right? It can just zip around, it gets to everyone, and then at that point, as long as your default is that the first one is good, then that's it. You're already pretty. So obviously, not if you're trading $10 million, you might want to wait for a block or two to be sure. But for $50, $100, $1,000, you don't even bat an eyelid, because it just always works.
But if you were really if you thought there was a genuine risk that someone was going to do a double spend attack on you, you'd want to wait like 5 or 6,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. But how many of those
So that
scenarios are you really worried about, right? Like if I'm buying a sandwich and it costs me $5 to buy this sandwich, there is nobody in the world who is going to set, like doing a double spend is not simple, right? You need to see exactly the transaction that is going on. You need to have some miners on speed dial who are running their hundreds of, millions of dollars of mining equipment, have it all ready to go. I scanned the thing. They're waiting right there. Send it off to the miner. Hey man, look, I know you've got your 20 million. Can you just put that like on hold for a second? Look, Jeremy's trying to buy a sandwich. Let me just get this one into the block ahead of that. And what's the gain? Okay, you made $5. Like you're not going to spend an hour of your $20 million hardware from mining Bitcoin in order to run this attack against one specific person, right? You're just not going to do it ever.
well, does it ever happen? This is why I'm kind of curious. Does it ever happen that two miners kind of add blocks at a roughly the same time, and there sort of ends up a split chain, even if it's one block?
Yeah, it does happen. It's fairly uncommon, but it does happen. And the important,
The longest that it's happened, like what's the longest split of a
I
chain?
think it's really besides the intentional ones, like when Bitcoin Cash forked off and stuff like that. I think it's probably wouldn't be more than maybe like three or so blocks. Like one block happens once in a while. It's called orphaning. Sometimes like it would get to a second block occasionally, just if the maths lined up, where it was like you got one block at the same time as another one, and then one had a second one mined like pretty quickly. But the design of the system is such that everything reconciles on average pretty fast because
They're very fast. If you think about it, what there's like how many blocks are there in a week? Like say it's a
yeah, it's
thousand.
like
Okay.
144 a day. So yeah, it's about 1,000 a week.
Yeah, so let's just use round numbers and say once in every thousand, there was one of these awesome blocks. For another one to happen, the probability of that is 1 in every 1,000,000.
Yeah,
So that's in every 1,000 weeks. So that's every 20 years.
yeah,
So you're starting like vanishingly low, and for it to happen 3 times then would be 1 in 20,000 years.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And like again, yeah, that's just some like rough numbers. I really don't want to, say
but
that
don't,
that's the
don't
yeah,
quote me
yeah,
on
that's
that.
where
Not medical certainty or anything. I'm just
yeah.
saying
So the point is that because
grows
yeah, for
exponentially.
all of the miners, the worst thing in the world is for them to be fighting over which blocks it was, right? If they get any
Oh,
sense
absolutely.
that they are on the minority side, they want to switch as quickly as possible because anytime they're mining on the block that is the wrong
Oh,
one, they're just wasting their own
that's way too
money.
much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So historically, the model has sort of proven itself that people have been able to reconcile back onto the same chain very, very, very fast. And this is where some of the problems. I mean, it just depends how deep into all this we go. But this is the topic of this episode. In like proof of stake, is that is sort of less proven. It might work, but it's less proven because in proof of work, you can only mine on one side of the fork. If there's a split like that, you have to choose. You can't mine both with the same electricity. But with proof of stake, if I have 1,000 coins, I can proof of stake on both chains, and I'm not forced to make a decision. And therefore, the game theory incentives are completely different because there's not a strong, snowball incentive for everybody to realign back onto the same one because the losing ones are wasting their electricity. That's not the same on proof of stake, which is one of the reasons I'm more skeptical of their model.
Can I jump back to something we were talking about before? When you were saying you're looking at the white paper and you're talking about nodes, but in the white paper there were, as you've sort of mentioned in a couple of the episodes, the white paper refers to both nodes and mining nodes, like non-mining nodes and mining nodes as nodes, right? Because Satoshi, in that paper at least, it seems like he would think that all nodes would be mining, but now of course there's non-mining nodes. So when we were talking about the scaling issues, it's true that it would become more expensive for the non-mining nodes, right? But if you think about it, for a mining node, it becomes no more expensive.
Well, it does become more expensive for a mining node, but again, it's sort of a question of how you imagine it, right? Like if you have spent $100,000, let's say, which is probably even a conservative estimate, on getting your mining set up where you've got all your machines, you've got your employees to
Yeah,
run it, you've got your cooling, you've got your rent, you know, you've got your payoffs to the
yeah, yeah.
government, whatever you've got all these
Uh,
costs, right? And then somebody's like, listen, we're going to need another 5 gigabytes of storage space. You're not going to be like, shit, that's $20 for a hard drive. Like, shut it down. It's over. Like, you're not going to do that.
no, but actually, it doesn't even it because it actually means that the proof of work, the difficulty problem, just becomes slightly doesn't grow slightly as quickly as it would otherwise. Like the free market, the market, the system that's built in actually cancels out, I
Yeah.
believe.
Well, so obviously, yeah, then
Just
that
a little bit more money in the other parts, then you end up spending a little bit less on the proof of work, and it actually cancels out to
yeah,
zero.
exactly. As if
I mean,
Yeah, because mining the difficulty, yeah, balances to whatever is the very slimmest margin of return for the mining operations.
yeah,
Exactly, yeah.
market production or
That's
whatever.
right. And so when you have the argument about not, scaling the block size is to have these kind of, the costs for non-mining nodes, but non-mining nodes, while good, are not the key element to the system because a non-mining node is nice. It's nice to have, okay, I can verify all my transactions and all, whatever, but it's not what the majority of Bitcoin users are going to use. They're going to use, SPV wallets, like mobile wallets and stuff like that. And if the cost of that is that instead of being able to have the entire planet using crypto or Bitcoin Cash, instead you can only have, a few banks and a few big hedge funds and a couple of world governments who treat it like digital gold and barely even trade it, then what, what's the point, right? It's self defeating essentially.
Right, right.
Cool. So, interestingly, yeah, we had this week this report which came out, which I was amazed by, where Skrill, who is a huge payments company, I've talked to a few people about this study, and it seems like depending on where you are in the world, some people have heard of Skrill and some people haven't. But they are, they're not PayPal level big or Stripe level big, but they are kind of up there, at least in some parts of the world. They surveyed 8,000 people, so this is not a small endeavor, in the US, the UK, Canada, Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, and Italy. So pretty decent spread of countries in sort of North America and Europe in March and April of this year. And they found that in their survey, 84% of people recognize crypto. To me, that's maybe a little bit low. I would have thought it would have been at least, 95, maybe even 100% by now. But more surprisingly, they found 38% of those people own cryptocurrency already. 4 in 10 people, that's insane. 66% recognized Bitcoin by name. They knew, okay, Bitcoin, that's the biggest crypto. They could sort of describe that and everything. And then this is for me, obviously, being the Bitcoin Cash fan, was a bit of a blockbuster one where Bitcoin Cash is the second most recognized. So Bitcoin is number one at 66%, Bitcoin Cash 31%, and Ethereum, which is the number two by market cap and on a lot of other metrics, was only recognized by 22% of people. And then Bitcoin Cash was owned by 9% of those people, and Ethereum only by 8%. So Bitcoin Cash really putting up good numbers relative to its sort of prominence on those frequently referenced coin market cap rankings. And then they had 97% of the people who were involved in the cryptocurrency aspects got involved in the last year. So it really seems like on that exponential of people getting involved, that in the last year it's really started kicking off, and in the next year or two it'll pretty quickly be snowballing to nearly everyone, right, will be involved in this, to some extent, right? If 40% well, 38% of people own crypto, that means there's probably basically nobody who doesn't know someone who owns crypto, right? That's like, it's going to
Right, and
be,
there's going to be some people who won't own crypto until it's like directly useful for them.
yeah,
So
yeah,
so percent of people who have their mind open enough that they want to try crypto, like that would be much higher than 38%.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, people, yeah, I was mind blown. Like 38% of people. That's so many, and that's obviously a variety of situations, right? For some people, that means they've got their own wallets and they're all set up and they know all about it. And for some people, it's they bought a little bit on Coinbase or whatever they did, right? Or maybe their friend sent them $5 and then they forgot about it, or like there's all sorts of different scenarios. That 38% of people does not mean 38% of people are out there at the Bitcoin 2021 conference. This is the future and it's all over. But it's even just having that many people, I was blown away. But it did make sense to me because at my recent experience going to the London meetups, the crowd there, a vast majority of them have just got involved in the last year, right? So it sort of made sense. It sort of lined up for me with these statistics.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting here is that Bitcoin Cash is number two. Bitcoin itself is already going to have some teething problems about scaling, and I was thinking like, what's the biggest difference between these two? Is it just like some of these technicalities that there's a slightly bigger block size? And I'm thinking the biggest difference is going to be the community, because the guys who stayed with the previous one and didn't want any change, they're going to be even more conservative. Can you imagine trying to pull them on to increase the block size? But the Bitcoin Cash guys, they're already used to being like, okay, let's move, let's improve. We want to make this more scalable. We want to include transactions. We want it to be electronic cash. And so they're going to keep increasing the block size and keep making it more and more usable. Whereas whereas Bitcoin, they're going to be like, no, we're on digital gold. We don't want to change. So it could be quite interesting that, like, logically, like they're the market winner and they could sort of innovate, but they're not going to. Does that sound like a persuasive argument?
Well, yeah, that's definitely how I think of it. And there's a balance that you want to have, right? So, for instance, it's not beneficial, and I talked about this, I think, in the episode I did with Cameron, where I talked about cryptocurrency communities, where you do want to strike a balance. You don't want to have the world's most innovative cryptocurrency, because if you're always changing something, then it's the risks are higher, right? If you're always tweaking and twiddling this and that, then move fast and break things, you're going to break things, right? And so that's essentially what it comes down to. And especially when it comes to something like money, you want to have a high degree of confidence, stability, not necessarily in terms of the price, although also in terms of the price, but in terms of the fundamentals of the network, the reliability, all those kind of aspects, right? Investors are going to be looking for that. If you're changing things up every week, people are not going to think, look, let me put a life-changing amount of money in this, if they can't know that next week the devs are going to, add some new thing that's going to screw everything up. So in that sense, you don't want to be innovating too fast. But at the same time, you also don't want to be innovating too slow. And the BTC crowd, they basically have gone to the other extreme, where they've decided, okay, let's pretty much try and just ossify our protocol and really not tweak or upgrade it too much. And then being the biggest crypto, it makes sense that they have the most to gain from being reliable. But given that they're not at a current point where they could get to a world scale and everyone could be using it, in that sense, they're trading off massively in the network effect of people being able to use it among themselves and build that sort of, momentum and hype. So it's a big topic, and we're going to touch on this a little bit later as well. In the Bitcoin Cash community, is Bitcoin Cash is one of the more conservative coins, I would say, in terms of how they approach adding new features and tweaking and changing everything, because in general, the mission is simple, which is peer-to-peer cash. So for that, you want to have a fixed limit of 21 million coins, and you want the payments to be scaled to global size and be reliable and cheap. So those are the top priorities, and everything is kind of in service of that. But they are still proactive about this. Like, for instance, recently, one of the things that has been going in has been double spend proofs, which is a method where, like we were talking about before, where if you want to send small payments and not wait for a block, they've put in a technology so I can send something around to everyone, and then if somebody tries to double spend me, then somebody will obviously receive the two conflicting payments, and they publish a proof out onto the network, like an alert saying, warning, here's a double spend. But because, like we talked about, if it only takes 1 to 2 seconds for everything to propagate around, if you've waited, let's say 2 seconds, 1 second for the transaction to bounce around, and then 1 second to see that nobody broadcast an alert, well, then you have even more confidence that your transaction is going to be valid and nobody's trying to kind of scam you. So those kind of features, that's killer. That's amazing. But
But those only add value. Like that can't make the whole thing less reliable. That's just something on top. So that's hardly radical. And the other thing that Bitcoin Cash has done, which has increased the block size, it's definitely not a radical move, right?
well, it depends who you ask, right? According to me, no, it's not radical at all. And when there was the community was debating all of this in 2016, 2017, you know, originally it was like well over 90%, probably more than 95% of people who were debating it at that time just said, look, let's just raise the block size limit. Like, even at the time, it was as simple as saying, look, it's 1 megabyte now. And people would some people would sort of say, oh, well, it's risky. You just say, well, how about we just put it up to 2? And look, is that going to melt down the entire world? No, right? Even at that point, it was pretty clear that 2 megabytes could be handled. And then we could see, oh, look, it worked and it was fine. But instead, due to everything that happened with the forums starting to censor and ban people and certain people who were, influential or who were close to the code repositories, kind of getting their fingers into it and stuff like that, they just sort of split the narrative so effectively. It was brilliantly done in hindsight, by those people, but it did sort of just take a lot of manipulation essentially to convince a huge percentage of people, mostly people who came after the split had already been established, that there was going to be some grand issue with having larger blocks, which, as we've seen now, Bitcoin Cash has had those bigger blocks and it's been perfectly fine and the fees are low and it's still reliable. But by now the narratives have already diverged too much.
So what do you think of the narrative that it's somehow in the mind? Now it's not exactly clear in my head how this narrative works, but something like it's in the miner's interest because high transaction fees and forcing people to hold, I guess high transaction fees and sort of putting a limit on people's ability to cash in and cash out, therefore pushes the price up, and that's what miners want, and they're the ones who are really pushing this split.
Well, yeah, you do want to have ultimately. So let's say right now the network security, the amount of mining infrastructure you can support, is based on the coin rewards for each block plus the transaction fees, right? And Bitcoin was designed rather ingeniously by Satoshi to front load the issuance so that in the early days there was a lot of new coins coming out and therefore you didn't need many transaction fees, right? Because the coins themselves were already the reward. But then the coins drop off as time goes on in terms of being distributed to the miners. But the idea is that as time goes on, you would sort of have a proportional system where as the block rewards dropped off, the transactions would be growing to compensate, right? So that at the end, you would end up with a system where the only thing was the network fees, but by then you would have a massive pool of people all transacting. So those 0.1 cent fees all add up to cover, the 50 Bitcoins, let's say, that it was in the original days where it was 50 Bitcoins every block, right? So that's kind of that was sort of the original plan. And that's still, I think, a good plan. It's premised on going big. It's not going to work if it only gets a little bit of the way and then sort of meanders along. But that's kind of what we're talking. That's why I'm talking about the global reserve currency, right? That everybody can use every day for all their finances. The opposite side of the coin, where you say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have a small block so that we have high fees and therefore retain that same amount of payments to the miners. Well, it's pretty simple to understand. If you have two let's say I'm making you Visa and MasterCard, and Visa is going to cost, $10 a transaction and only allow 1,000 people to transact, and MasterCard is going to cost 1 cent and allow 10 million people to transact. Which one of those payment systems is going to win out?
Right, but you can see that. Okay, I think I think the case might be American Express does charge more, right? And merchants therefore don't really like to accept American Express. They do sometimes,
Yeah.
but much more take Visa and Mastercard. But what's kind of interesting there is, yeah, like the merchants decide that, but it is in American Express's interest to keep up with a high fee model. So in this case, maybe it's the same thing that like the miners are the ones who, it's in their economic interest to, say, keep using Bitcoin. But as well, first of all, as transactions rates go up and so transaction prices go up on the Bitcoin network, and then as more users are using it to do daily transactions, there will be more and more pressure for people to move over to Bitcoin Cash. Does that sound plausible? Or
Yeah, well,
defensible?
yeah, that's kind of the idea, right? Is that right now, because the hash rate follows the price, because the price of BTC has been so much higher, therefore the the transaction fees, it's sort of still worth it. Like it's a bit of self-perpetuating, if you see what I'm saying. Because Bitcoin is $40,000 a coin, therefore paying $10,000, $10 per coin to move it around, if it is just people making these big, large trades, can still kind of hold itself together. But it's premised on the price being high, because if the price starts to drop off, then the amount of mining equipment, that can that can be sustained by that is lower. So if the Bitcoin Cash to BTC ratio starts to rise or drop, if BCH starts rising against BTC, which is why at the start of every episode I talk about the ratio there, if that starts to rise, then more of the miners will want to mine on Bitcoin Cash. And then that, as that price rises and as the miners move over, it gives the network more security and more confidence. And so then more people will start using it for transactions, which will then increase the amount of fees available. And so you can sort of see this loop happening where slowly the miners start to shift one way or the other. And the miners are not the ones setting the rates, they're just responding to the market forces. So really it's the price that needs to change for the miners to switch. The miners don't switch, and then, the market picks, right? People buy and sell on all the exchanges, and that sort of sets the price. So to date, BTC has been able to hold its lead fairly comfortably. But in the last 6 months, since January, and with the latest episode of the fees being really high on BTC, we've seen BCH reverse its trend and go from 118 to 1 at the bottom to now 55 to 1, and it's been as high as 35 to 1. And if it keeps spreading that adoption and more people using it, like the USD cent graph that we were looking at, even though it's 55 to 1 in terms of the price, the actual trade every day is like 1.5 to 1 or 2 to 1, right? And if it gets to a
Right.
point where it's 1 to 1, and then BCH is doing more trade, sooner or later the world's going to really clue in that Bitcoin only has the brand name. It's actually just less useful.
Right, right. And also like so like the amount of money that you spend on mining is not really a very interesting metric at all. That's sort of measuring, like American Express and Mastercard on how much money each of them wastes. You're going to say the least efficient network is the one that's somehow worth more.
Well,
For
yeah,
me, that
the mining hash rate on being on BTC is significant, in the sense that it gives it more security. But on the other hand, yeah, like you're saying, ultimately you want, well, firstly, we sort of touched on the environmental angle, right? The
yeah,
environmental capacity for BTC is quite limited, because the if you have the same amount of electricity, if you're processing more transactions, it's obviously more efficient per transaction, right? So Bitcoin Cash will become more environmental as it gets bigger and bigger, which was the whole idea. So at a small scale, it's horribly inefficient, but at massive scale, it's massively efficient compared to the banking sector, which needs to have bank branches and offices and cars and security guards and all this kind of crap, data centers, whatever they've got, right? Bitcoin Cash literally just has the nodes and the miners, and when the coin issuance is gone, the transaction fees set the reward, and that sets the difficulty, which sets the amount of mining power you put into it. So it will literally come out to a perfectly efficient system, like we were talking about with the miners adjusting to the marginal rate of return. I forget the exact word, but you know what I'm talking about. And
Yeah. But it's also just like, do you really like how high do you need the proof of work to be for it to be secure? Like, I'm not sure above a certain point, above a certain point, you're just burning electricity. I'm not sure you're making it that much more secure. Like in theory, yes, but like in practice, you'd still have to mount such a big attack.
that's right, exactly. And so, like BTC is in the position where if a government wanted to build enough miners to take over the network, it's basically impossible, right? Because by the time they started like buying up, more and more miners, the rest of the network would have already expanded ahead of them. And probably if they started doing that, the whole world would be looking at this, and other countries would start buying, to fight them off, or like, what the whole network already just has so much gear and so much stuff going on. And so with BCH, the only people who are threatening to BCH, even though they have 2% of the hash rate, let's say right now. Well, that's already way bigger than every government or companies, whatever. They don't have any miners, right? So it's
Exactly.
already more than enough. And so they're only ones who can attack them are the BTC miners. But the BTC miners don't do that, and we haven't really seen them doing that. And why? Because the BTC miners are the
And
BCH miners. They can mine
I
both.
know they're the same people who are just switching over to which are just changing their proportion of compute power from one network to the other.
Exactly.
And secondly, like they've got enough economic incentive to mine, even if it's on the other network. You don't attack the Bitcoin Cash network because you're busy on the Bitcoin network until, as you say, people will all switch over to Bitcoin Cash, in which case they'll move to Bitcoin Cash too. They're not in they're not in the business of trying to attack a network. And the one thing I thought about the whole thing is like if someone managed to do like once in a massive attack and was able to swindle, then the entire currency would become worthless the next day, and what they've stolen would be worthless. And so, like, it sort of defeats the entire purpose of doing a double spend attack.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of really large scale double spend attacks, but you're exactly right. The incentives don't. That's the whole
But
premise of cryptocurrency, of Bitcoin especially, is that the miners, they need the Bitcoins to be valuable because that's what they're getting rewarded with. So why would they shoot themselves in the foot? They've already spent the money on their gear. They can't get that back. Same with their electricity. So the last thing they want to do is tank their own investment. What we've got here, this story in the Bitcoin Cash community this week, which just came up in the last couple of days, was this new site that came out called Satoshi Pyramid. I think it's been live for about a week, maybe like 8 or 9 days, but it sort of kicked off on Reddit a couple of days ago. And the idea is that it is literally a blatantly advertised pyramid scheme. So the site has a Bitcoin Cash address, and anybody can send in any amount of Bitcoin Cash they want, and there is a pyramid structure so that there's an increasing amount of coins required at each level of the pyramid. And if you get in at one level of the pyramid and it gets through to the next level of the pyramid, then you get paid back double your money from the people on the next level, right? And that's how a pyramid scheme, that's how a Ponzi scheme works, right? But this is it's not like it is a scam in the sense of all the scams in the world that work like this, but it's blatantly advertised as such. So it's like a game where everybody is aware. It's literally called Satoshi Pyramid, so everybody knows that this is what they're playing, right? And before we say any more about this, full disclosure, I played this a little bit because I thought this was funny as hell, right? So if you're getting involved in this, for all the listeners, not financial advice, just if you want to have fun with this, do it. But be aware, it's literally a pyramid scheme game, and there's a clock which counts down, which starts at 60 days, so about 2 months. And if the clock hits zero, then all of the people who haven't got paid out yet, well, they lose all their money, right? So, so if you're in and enough other people buy in after you, you've doubled your money. And if you're in the last wave of people, then you're just shit out of luck, right? And and this is just really. and there's a couple more little things to say about this. So the first part is that there's nothing to stop the guy running the site from just taking all the money and running. But because it's on a blockchain, he's been able to demonstrate that he's not doing that, that he is sending out the payments to people, because everybody sending in the payments could be seen on the blockchain, and so can the payments going out. So in this way, obviously he could still just shut it down and just at any time grab the money and go. But the idea is that he would earn more from continuing to run the game than just stealing everybody's money, because he can keep, running a second game and a third game and a fourth game. And the guy who set this up is quite known in the Bitcoin Cash community. So there was at least a seed of kind of trust that he was not, just some random person who'd set this up, but he was, sort of banking on his reputation to at least run the site a little bit. So
what was the first level?
So the first level was, I think it was 2 Satoshis. So because it's a pyramid scheme, it goes up exponentially. So it started at 2 Satoshi, so like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a cent, right? And it quickly got up to, we can see here, so level 21 was 0.01 Bitcoin. So what's that right now? That's about $70, right? 770, no, that's about $7, right? And then, so it's quickly scaled up, doing about one day to go through each level.
Doubling every time,
Yep,
more or less.
doubling every time. So it's got up to here. So level 30 was 5 Bitcoin Cash. Level 31 was 10.7. Level 32 was 21.4. And it's gone up and up and up. And I haven't checked the latest, but it was up to level 39, which was 2,700 Bitcoin Cash. And at this point that it was at this, I took this screenshot, I think last night or whatever, but this morning it had paid out more than like nearly $1.2 million to people, right? So it has been, it's a pyramid scheme. People are getting paid out of it, right? And there's this other little sort of wrinkle to it, which is that the guy who's running the site, he has said, look, there's a 10% fee that he is taking for all of this, but his plan, because he owns Bitcoin Cash, he wants to spread Bitcoin Cash, so he set up this site in order to spread Bitcoin Cash adoption, because what he looked at the crypto scene and he thought every other coin is basically premised on gambling and speculation and financial hype, right? So like Dogecoin is the classic, right? Everybody understands that's mostly just hype. They're not changing the world so much as they're just hyping each other up to buy. And the same with...
Who did Dogecoin copy? Like, they're the exact same technology as another coin, right?
Well, they just split off from Litecoin. It was basically just let me think. No, it might have even been Bitcoin. I think, yeah, it's literally just no, it must be Litecoin because it was script mine. So I think they split off from Litecoin, which itself just split off from Bitcoin without really that much innovation, right? So it's still fairly compatible. And Dogecoin actually have recently been in the position of trying to figure out whether they keep copying Bitcoin or whether they start copying Bitcoin Cash, because they're getting, their fees are going up because too many people are trading it. So they sort of, they're going to have it, because there's not really that many developers on Dogecoin, right? Because no developers are like, great, let me spend my whole life doing Dogecoin. They don't give a shit. So they're struggling. But anyway, so somebody looked at all these coins and they thought, okay, Dogecoin is obviously just hype. Like tons of other coins, they literally just hype. You can look at coinmarketcap.com. So many of them are just hype. Maybe Bitcoin has some legitimate development. Ethereum now has a lot of projects and so on. But it started out being about crypto kitties and NFTs, right? Has recently been this huge bubble. And so they just said, look, every single coin has people just gambling and speculating away. We need to have some of that in Bitcoin Cash. So they invented this Satoshi pyramid scheme where the fees from it are going to go back into the ecosystem to fund, real projects, but kind of harnessing the speculative urge of people to buy, to gamble and trade away. And this is pretty true to crypto, because one of the earliest apps, probably the earliest app that was big, that was known in Bitcoin in 2011, was called Satoshi Dice, right? And you can still play it today, but you can only play it on Bitcoin Cash. You can't play it on Bitcoin anymore because the fees are too high. But it's a site where you can send in any amount of, well, there's a maximum, but you up to a limit, you can send in any amount of cryptocurrency, and it generates a random number, and then if you win, it pays you back out some, so it's kind of like a sort of like a roulette type of thing, basically. And you can set your odds. Do you want to have your odds to be 10 to 1 or 5 to 1 or 3 to 1? And obviously your payout varies based on your odds. And you just send it in. And because it's on the blockchain, they can prove that they're not scamming because they can publish, look, these are the transactions. This is how we generated the random numbers. They reveal that at the end of each day so you can see that it all lines up. And yeah.
And you can see that on average they pay out, whatever it is minus their fees, right? That's all transparent.
That's right, exactly. So people can have some confidence that they can offer a house edge of only 0.1% or whatever it is that they have, which no other gambling website or casino or anything can afford.
They try down the crown and asking for that.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. So financial speculation, especially in this sort of pseudonymous, unregulated way, has always been a classic of cryptocurrencies. And I just thought this was the funniest, most actually quite brilliant idea to do, because in Bitcoin Cash, this sort of pyramid type game, the idea is that people who have bought in, just like any obvious pyramid scheme, are incentivized to go out and spread the message around to people, right? So it's a bit self-sustaining in that way. And obviously people are going to lose money and get hurt. But, and here's the very key point, that people were sort of commenting on this, and some people sort of said, okay, this is terrible because it's going to associate cryptocurrency with scams. And I kind of thought, well, look, what world are you living in? Cryptocurrency is already associated with scams and hype and gambling. Anyway, that's not
scam.
That's definitely not new. At least this one's honest about it, right? So because you know what you're getting into, I don't think people who lose out are going to be that salty, because it's not people who just have no idea what's going on. To actually play this game, you can't even send from an exchange because you won't be able to get the money back to your address. To play this game, you have to read the website, you have to install a Bitcoin Cash wallet, you have to get some coins, you have to understand how cryptocurrency works, send in your coins, and then see how it goes, right? So you can't just sort of accidentally, whoops, I put my entire retirement savings into this. The only way to be involved is if you understand crypto at least enough to know how private keys work and sending around your money and being involved. So in that way, I don't think the people who lose out are going to be that salty because they knew what they were getting themselves into. But it is this very clever sort of system of incentives. And like I said, I sent in a little bit of money, not very much. I sent in a bit and I got paid out, and I was like, this is great. So, viewers, listeners, beware, right? If I do not recommend this to you. It is literally a pyramid scheme. But on the other hand, it is pretty fun. So if you, I'll leave it at that, right? Everybody can make their own decisions. But
well, it begs the question: will the casino industry be the first industry that would move online onto crypto?
Yeah,
because it is in many parts of the world, but you can't stop it on Bitcoin.
That's right, exactly, and that's been long sort of speculated, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. You could do, Satoshi Dice or Satoshi Pyramid on Bitcoin Cash. Maybe other coins have their own, variations of this same kind of theme. But a blockchain can provably verify their payouts, and B, offer, a house edge that no other physical casino or even gambling company can afford to match, because the setup fees are so low, the infrastructure costs are near nothing. So financial speculation in the broad sense, like we talked about right at the start, with the casino, the whole of crypto being this huge casino, it's bootstrapping an entire industry, because not everything is financial speculation, but there's enough financial speculation to drag in some money, and then that's like the seed funding Bitcoin is not a company, so it doesn't have VC investors, but the users are the VC investors because they put their money in. And so if a lot of them come to speculate, it blows up the market cap, it creates an economy that then people can use it to trade for other things, right? And that's how cryptocurrency has expanded from being worth nothing to being worth, $1 trillion or more, at points this year. And so this kind of using these kind of gimmicks and games to really get people involved in cryptocurrency and to even just try it out with a small amount and get excited and everything like that. I think it's pretty. I think it's pretty smart. And I mean, even if people said, okay, it could be, associating us with a scam. Well, cryptocurrency's already got a terrible reputation, but the fact is, it's got past that. Like, yeah, it's used to buy drugs or it's used by criminals or whatever, but that is now a very small percentage of the transactions. But even when it had it in the early days, I mean, criminals and scammers, they use technology just like everyone else, they use mobile phones. If it's useful to people, it's useful to scammers, basically. And that, everybody's starting to understand that about cryptocurrency. So I'm not particularly worried about it being, well, Bitcoin Cash, it just has Satoshi Pyramid and it's all a scam. Well, some people will think that, but some people will try it out and see, wait a second, so this is one application, what about the other applications? And, then that legitimate adoption can come about as a side effect, which is really
Right.
important.
That's kind of like going down to the casino and going all money. Like,
Yeah,
I'm not going to US dollars.
yeah, exactly. And I think everybody's sort of starting to understand that about cryptos. So anyway, that's a very interesting story just cropping up there with that. All right, so we've got a slide here about Bitcoin and mining incentives. So I mean, we've kind of already been over this, right? We already talked about the white paper, how much the nodes matter, the proof of work, everything like that. Is there any other sort of questions or whatever you had that you wanted to ask? This is a kind of a good time for it.
Uh, I think this is awesome that that you're just covering this. Um, I read a lot of like things in ordinary media, like mainstream media, that just says things like, there's this complicated, like, to support this system, it has to do all this mathematics or something. And it's like, that's not really what proof of work is.
Yeah,
Um, and the journalists, okay, so the journalists didn't really fully understand it. That's okay, but it's definitely within most people listening to this podcast. It's within their ability to understand it quite easily.
yeah.
It's not that complicated.
Yeah, so the
Um,
proof of work type of stuff. I will do a separate episode. I really want to do one where I get somebody on who is a miner and we, walk through and explain it all. But for people who've never really looked into it, essentially the mining, it's often described as this huge complicated problem, but it's not really like complicated in the sense of like genius level IQ or something, in terms of the computers mining it. It's really just random. And because they're doing this random property, like trying to pick lottery tickets out of a hat, and if you had to try and pick lottery tickets out of a hat, but only obviously one lottery ticket wins, you would have to do a lot of that before you hit a winner. And then once you'd found a winner, nobody could say you'd faked it because there's no way you could have known which one was the winner until you'd picked it out and read it and seen this is the winning ticket. And so most of the
so that's what do you think about changing the proof of work problem to be something that's genuinely useful?
Yeah, I don't like that, I mean, I think people have sort of suggested that, like for instance, folding
Yeah,
at home, or there are other, types of schemes, and there are other coins that do have that, right? You can, I don't know what they all are, but if you're interested in that, you can look into that. But the reason those coins generally haven't been successful is that the point of the doing the proof of work and burning the electricity is to be an incentive, an economic incentive in the system, not to cheat and all those things we were discussing before. So if you add something else into the mix, that just upsets the balance. It's not like really adding something, actually it's taking away from it. Instead of the system being a sort of pure economic model where the only point of this is to is to back up the veracity of the transactions and keep people invested in the system. If you sort of have some other, like cancer curing research or something else going on, well, then suddenly now you've got, you're trying to run a cryptocurrency, which is already hard and complicated and has a lot going on, and suddenly you're mixing in these other elements. It just upsets the balance and kind of, it doesn't really add anything. What do you get out of that, if you see what I'm saying?
Well, what you get out of it is like you're able to do two things at once. You're able to do the proof of work as a proof of your system, but also like have that extra compute power be used for something rather than just wasted on work.
Yeah.
Would be the
I mean,
theory.
it's,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
well, like theoretically, we might see a coin like that. I think if there is a good combo of those things, I expect somebody will try it and make it work and show that it's a viable model. But to date, we haven't really seen, none of the top 10 coins are folding at home coin or anything like that because, yeah, it's just, you need to spend the economic incentives that keep a cryptocurrency running are very finely balanced. And if you put in these other algorithms or different things that the miners have to worry about besides just their strict profit, then things kind of fall out of balance.
Right. Do you know there is one thing that Bitcoin one utility that all the proof of work does prove to like the universe or to mankind at least.
Yeah.
It proves that is it SHA-256,
Yeah,
right?
that's the mining algorithm. Yeah.
It proves that that algorithm can't be reversed
Yeah.
because if it could, if anyone on this planet knew that it could be reversed, they would start like they would start their own mining rig and start making money off it.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
later, someone else would figure out what their game is, and they would figure it out. And then before you know it, like it was very obvious, like that someone had broken the the hash function. And so you can be very very certain that no one else has figured it out yet.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to this point that sometimes people ask me, "Oh, well, aren't you worried about somebody being able to steal your Bitcoin? Like, because it's open source software and everything is just available to the whole world. You know, isn't that a problem, right? Because people are used to thinking of security by obscurity, right? They're used to thinking of a bank where you have a building, and so to keep it secure, you put guards outside it, you put guns, you have fences, and you put all the gold in the middle, and by armoring it up on every side, you make it secure, right?
The key thing is you don't tell everyone how you're securing it. You don't tell them what the security systems are. You don't tell them what databases you're using and what you hope that would help, or that secrecy will help it. But
But well, the but is then with crypto is that it's kind of like if you it's the opposite of that where if instead of putting my gold in a secret underground vault, what about if I put it in a transparent glass cube and I put it in the middle of Times Square in New York and I said anybody can do anything they want to try and get my gold, which I have, and everybody can see that it's sitting in the box, right? And people are going to come with their flamethrowers and their ice picks and their I don't know, whatever. I published all the schematics for my cube, everything, all the information you need about it, and I put it there, and I put the gold inside it, so there was a reward to get at it, and people dropped bombs on it and shot guns at it and did everything they could. Well, the longer the gold is still in that box, with the whole world, watching this live stream of everybody trying to get the gold in the box and failing, you can be very, very confident that nobody knows how to. Because if they knew how to, well, they would have already done it and got the gold out. And so that's the principle of cryptocurrencies: is the security is security by transparency rather than by obscurity. And even though it's counterintuitive for people initially, it's actually more secure. It's much easier to be confident in that. So the one thing I think that maybe could be changed or we might see in terms of the proof of work is potentially it might need a change once quantum computing really arrives. That is the one area where, well, we might need to tweak the algorithms because some algorithms are better suited, to protect against quantum computing attacks. So that is a case where we could see potentially a change in the algorithm. But other than that, I don't really see it happening because how it works now, it's funded all this mining infrastructure and it's very secure. All right. So as we kind of come into the last few little segments of the show, I've got community comment of the week, which I do on most of the shows. This one comes from Imaginary Username, who is one of the Bitcoin Cash developers. And recently, there's sort of been this debate going on among some of the devs, where some of them wanted to create a sort of a test coin, like a spin-off of Bitcoin Cash, where they could test out new features because they were frustrated, like we were saying before, that Bitcoin Cash is on the more conservative side. And while some features do get in because everybody agrees they're a good idea, it does take time, and some people wanted to be doing new features and trying this and that. So they were sort of making an argument for that. An Imaginary Username, his response was, the number one most important feature of a cryptocurrency is network effect, with number two being confidence. Both have themselves and time as their own biggest facilitators. Things that have large networks for a while begets wider networks, ditto confidence. It is therefore puzzling how many are still willing to put other much lesser features, in quotation marks, above these two. No, your favorite feature is not worth resetting BCH back into the land of doubt and chaos. It doesn't matter if it's the most brilliant thing in the world. And I sort of really, really strongly agree with that, because as we've seen in the last couple of years, the reason that Bitcoin Cash has not been able to just, accelerate ahead and crush ahead of BTC has been there's been too much infighting. First there was Bitcoin SV and all the drama with that, and then they split off, and then there was BCHA recently, and then they split off, and now people are talking about some other new coin. The inability for the network to just stop trying to change everything or come up with newer and better things all the time, and instead to just focus on, look, if we're just a little bit conservative but making things that help with the electronic cash case and which are not controversial, and then just give the network time to breathe and time for new businesses and projects to emerge, and all of that, then if the community is all being productive instead of infighting amongst each other, it will actually be a lot better off. And so I said, yeah, spot on. Third most important is economic efficiency, low fees, and fourth most important is decentralization, resistance to partisan capture at any layer of the ecosystem. So in a coin, you want to have a big network effect and consumer confidence that come by not rocking the boat too much. And once you have those, you want it to be cheap and distributed so that it's not controllable. And those are the primary things that I feel that the community should be focusing on and encouraging, and not getting too wrapped up in trying to do these other, test coins or add other features or make better and better contracts or any of that kind of stuff. There's already a lot of other coins that are doing that stuff, and we've already got our niche.
So, by the way, I do have a couple of thought experiments I wanted to run by you before, if we've got time for that in the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's up to you. I don't know how long you got. If you're still willing to keep rolling, I am.
I'm enjoying this, so time won't be.
Okay, all right. Okay, hit me. Let's talk about it.
So one of them is, what would happen? So in the past, countries have given up on their own currency. Like I think Ecuador, after a couple of failed attempts, they just said, we're giving up, we're adopting US dollar. What would happen if a country, their central bank, they call you up tomorrow and they're like, mate, you seem to know what's going on. We want to just adopt a cryptocurrency as our national currency. Which cryptocurrency would you advise them to do? And then what do you think would be the long-term consequences? Or what do you think the consequences would be?
Yeah, so I mean, my answer I think is going to be obvious, which is that I would advise them Bitcoin Cash, right? But let me take a bit of another, a bit of a broader angle to them and say, okay, they can pick any. Well, obviously, I think Bitcoin Cash would be the best because it's the fastest, it's the cheapest, it's designed to be used just as regular money. But the broader case is sort of nothing to do with that, which is, in some sense, the entire cryptocurrency marketplace, all the speculation and all that stuff you can see going on. Essentially, what it is a kind of, well, like we've said before, gambling, where what people are betting on is which coin will be the coin that becomes the world currency, right? Because if you think about existing fiat currencies, especially by this point, it's very obvious that cryptocurrencies are growing and they're going to keep growing. until they just take over, right? There's not really any grand innovation that is coming out of the US dollar that is going to compete with cryptocurrencies, which always have new features, new ideas, more and more people getting familiar with them, more and more trade happening, more and more efficient ways of doing things, smart contracts, new technology. It's just not only is that the US dollar is good because it's already widespread and accepted, but fundamentally it doesn't improve. The US dollar doesn't get cooler and slicker and get more people interested. It doesn't happen, but cryptocurrencies do. So as that trend accelerates, it's essentially inevitable that one of them takes over or that they take over as an industry. So with that premise in mind, what you need to sort of think about is the network effect. And I talked about this. I'll link to it. It was in episode 8 of the podcast where I talked about the path to global adoption and about the different competition among cryptocurrencies. Which is once you've accepted that cryptocurrency is going to take over, then in theory, at large scale, you should have one coin which sort of rises up ahead of the pack. And originally that coin was BTC because it had 95% of all the activity and energy was there. And all the other coins were just like tiny experiments. And the idea was if any of them has any good features, we'll put them into Bitcoin. But that kind of got derailed, like you were saying, where they stopped innovating or accepting those changes and they started driving away traffic and users by refusing to raise the block size. But if any other coin can sort of grab a critical mass and get the ball rolling, then it would quickly shoot up to then draw in other people just because it was the most useful and had the most trade going on. So if you were, let's say, a medium-sized country, you could probably pick just about any coin. I would recommend them to pick Bitcoin Cash, but they could pick just about any one that they felt had, the seeds of what they were looking for. And then by adopting that, it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy where then other countries would also they wouldn't want to start a different crypto or pick a different one because they probably trade with your country. So they want to have the same currency so they can trade with you. And then the third country, it's a knock-on effect and it snowballs like that.
Would that first country thus, by setting off that domino effect, become incredibly wealthy?
Yes.
They're lending their own authority to the system, but also getting in early.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's where cryptocurrency adoption is essentially inevitable because at every layer of the economic spectrum, the whole world is currently basically in a race to understand that we are going to switch to cryptocurrencies. And therefore, once you understand that premise, then you think, well, it's better to be early than late, right? And then you switch. And then all that does is it makes it more likely for everyone else to realize this is happening. I need to switch too. And that's what we've seen in the entire history of cryptos has been over time, more and more and more people switching onto cryptos. And as more people were doing it, well, then some companies started to think, wait, are we going to miss out on this? And so now they've started to kind of slide into it. And now we've seen the banks having the same thing. And it's inevitable that governments are going to have the same thing, where once one breaks away from the herd and sort of makes a play for it, not every other currency, every other country can't afford to be left behind. And so then they all have to rush in afterwards.
So in that way, it's kind of like getting on the internet, right? Like back in 1994, getting on the internet was fun. It was a bit niche, but like it actually wasn't that useful. But by 2000, okay, there's a lot, nowadays it's basically impossible to live your life if you're not on the internet. So that network, that's the network effect you're talking about, drawing people in. And if you think that when did like Bitcoin got started, like approximately 20 years after the internet?
Yeah.
Probably maybe a similar adoption curve.
Yeah, well, I think probably faster, but similar, but maybe even faster. And the reason is because the internet is the facilitator for cryptocurrencies, right? The internet didn't have the internet to bootstrap it, but but Bitcoin has, and that's why we've seen Bitcoin has been around now for like 12 years. I mean, the internet is older than 20 years. Like Bitcoin started in 2009, right? 2008, 2009. And so the internet is obviously older than 1989. Like there was earlier than that. They were doing, it was like in the 50s and stuff where the military were starting to sort of create these networks So it took actually, the better part of maybe 60 years. But for cryptocurrency, we've taken 12 years. And what do we? We've got 40% of people owning crypto, right? So if you think, it's probably in under 20. So probably in the next 8 years, we're going to see, huge amounts of people coming on board. Like even just in this year, I've been blown away at how many large companies have announced some kind of crypto integration, right? And how much it's just becoming a believable inevitability in the global mindshare. So once you are thinking in those terms, money is also a lot stickier than the internet, because it has a higher cost, in the sense of the internet uh, is like there's not much downside, right? Like if you couldn't get the internet before and then suddenly you could read news, well, information is very attractive in that way. Like there's not much to lose.
I can still get my newspaper every day, right? I can still use my own telephone, the old ways of doing things. Whereas
Yeah,
I think you pointed out on some of the other podcasts that like a dollar in one system is a dollar less in another. So you really got to be in one or the other. So that would
exactly.
have a cascading effect.
And if
Um,
people stop demanding, another currency, if like I'm already in the position where I would rather be paid in cryptocurrency than in fiat currency. And I'll have a little bit of fiat currency because everybody else hasn't caught up to that yet. But as more and more people get caught up to that, I have less and less need for fiat currency, and eventually, I just won't trade. I won't, do any deals with anybody who doesn't accept crypto, because I'll just be like, you're living in the past.
right, right. So I'm kind of curious, like, does it not make sense then to diversify? Because if you think about it, like, if you're right on this, you would become incredibly wealthy, right? Probably wouldn't need to work. So doesn't it make sense to spread your bets across currencies?
Well, yeah, definitely in some sense, and I don't have any reasoning against. Everybody can invest in, whatever coins they like, right? And for individuals, if they think, okay, well, I mean, you think about it, there's 9,000 cryptocurrencies, right, or more right now. So you could get 9,000 dollars, and you could put one in each different cryptocurrency, and then you've
But
got
you
to.
you should also like weigh them by probability that you
Yeah.
think like ones that have a higher probability should probably have a little bit more, and the real like highly unlikely ones you might only put a few cents in and just say like they would have a long way to they would have a long way to grow as well,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So yeah, I'm not
Makes you
a.
like of those $9,000, how many would you put into Bitcoin Cash?
This is where I'm no
Which is
comment.
not
This is not financial advice. I'm
not
not.
financial advice.
I can't. I think, to me, my understanding or my investing philosophy is based around the idea that people should invest in cryptocurrency. There's this like sort of idea that is often said they shouldn't invest more than they can afford to lose. I don't, that's a good thing to tell to somebody who doesn't know anything about cryptocurrency. But to me, the way I think about it is you shouldn't invest more than you understand, which is that if you don't know much about cryptocurrency, you buy $1, well, that's about right. But if you've got a dollar and you start thinking, wait, what is this about? And then you read a little bit more and you understand, okay, what are the prospects for this to become the future? Or you do some trade with it, or you go to some meetups and you meet some people and you get involved in the community, and then I don't know, maybe you start accepting it at your business, or you ask your boss to pay you in it, or whatever. At each step, as you get more and more involved in it, then you can sort of allocate more and more of your resources to it. Because the real risk is to put a significant amount of money into it, but have no idea what's going on with it. Because in that way, if it all goes pear shaped, you're going to have no idea what happened. Your money's just, whether you lose the keys, or whether you pick the wrong coin and suddenly it goes to zero, or whether you get scammed, or like a million different things. You put it all in Satoshi Pyramid, like whatever it is, it sort of comes down to how much you understand it. But those two things are a virtuous cycle, where if you get a little bit, then you'll get interested, and then you'll read up about it, and then you could feel confident that you know what was going on, or you're prepared to experiment a little more, and then you get a bit more crypto. And then once you see how it's all working as time goes on, and I don't know, you listen to this podcast, or you there's a million resources out there about cryptocurrency. As you get more interested, then you can put more money into it. So that's my that that is my non-financial advice, which is invest only as much as you understand, and obviously do your research and raise the amount that you understand if you feel you want to do that.
Okay, so anyway, that's very interesting. It leads me to my next question. Do you think this necessarily has to be a natural monopoly? Like, could it end up being that there's like all the Spanish speaking world end up on one coin and all the English speaking world ends up, or all the developed world ends up on one coin, and then maybe, or that basically ends up as like a couple of coins sort of, just like when we fly at the moment, if we fly to China, we would convert some money into the yuan, or the renminbi. Um, uh, but do you think it would ever be that, you fly to a certain country and you're like, oh, I've got to switch coins?
Yes and no. I don't. When I say like Bitcoin Cash is going to be the global reserve currency, my philosophy is that it will be the biggest coin, but obviously it's not going to be that literally every other of the 9,000 cryptocurrencies are all going to go exactly to zero, and like, you know, that it's not going to work that way. While there will be a biggest coin by the virtue of those network effects, but because also we're in a world now where anybody can create a crypto, yeah, there will be a spread of different cryptos. So I think among the major commerce and whatever, probably it will all tend onto one network. But you can also think about maybe we end up in a situation where there's already services like sideshift.ai, for instance, where you send in one coin and it sends out another coin to another address, right? So let's say if I, like on this podcast, people can donate in Bitcoin Cash, right? So I don't actually accept Ethereum or Monero or BTC or whatever. But if anybody who has any of those currencies wants to donate to me, they can go on that service, pick whatever their favorite coin is, put the output as Bitcoin Cash to my address, and then send in whatever coins they want, and then the donation comes out to me, right? And as we see those services get more and more advanced, more and more liquidity, more and more integrated into point of sale systems and so on and so forth, people will be able to hold whatever currency they want and then just send it off to, they'll just be, maybe somebody will develop a universal little scan code that you can scan, and it has embedded into it, which network you're on and how to convert from one to the other. And then it just all happens seamlessly behind the scenes. So then it won't really matter what you're accepting or what I'm accepting or what our favorite cryptos are. It would just be scan to pay, and all the conversion is done automatically behind the scenes. But then once you have that kind of scenario, the money again rapidly will sort of all pile into whichever one is the most reliable or accepted, because you could say, well, my favorite currency is Monero, so I'm going to hold all my coins in Monero. But if everybody else, all the economic activity and growth is happening in Bitcoin Cash, then my ratio of Monero to Bitcoin Cash value is going to be going down over time. Even if I can just, seamlessly transfer across, like the BTC and BCH ratio that we were talking about before. If you have one dominant coin where most of the economic activity is happening, well, that will be growing faster and producing more, innovation and etc. than everything else. And so holding any other coin, you're just kind of like, I'm missing out because my coin's getting less valuable over time. Just like how now, if you hold fiat currencies, your fiat currencies are getting less valuable over time against cryptos, because even though there's a boom and bust cycle, on average, if averaged out over a 10-year period, your $1 is going to buy a lot less crypto than it did at the start, kind of thing.
Right. Okay, so there's your network. So there's two different network effects. It's one, you can sort of buy it and sell it or use it for transactions. But then there's the other thing of like, the more people that join the network, the more valuable the network becomes. It's very, very, very interesting. Okay, so those are sort of like some of the positive, like a country using it as their national currency. That's like a positive. Can I give you like sort of dystopian?
Yep, let's hear it.
All right. So we'll forget that tomorrow, Ecuador or someone adopts it as a national currency. Let's now think the opposite. The ghost of. Oh no, I've got to think about carefully how to word this so I don't get in trouble. Yeah. Imagine if someone did something that was highly illegal
Yeah.
and was very destructive to a country, and they
Yeah.
financed it using, I'm avoiding using the keywords that.
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about. Yep. So there's
Yep,
some adversarial situation against a large nation state. Yep.
yep, and they didn't, Bitcoin or blockchain or Bitcoin Cash weren't like key to this, but they use it as a way to finance it. And like one of the things that the United States government does to stop these sorts of attacks is they control the money, and they have controls on the money. And it might sound crazy, but like, well, anyway, um, I'm still like filtering things out of my brain as to think about the right way to say this. So imagine if they use cryptocurrencies, and then an uneducated public was like, right, we need action, we want to stop it. Now, work through what you think. What, like, if the US just went nuclear on this and decided they're going to throw everything they can, they've got the current financial system at their disposal. They've got like a lot of bully power around the world. Like, what would be the most extreme thing, and what, like, the most extreme output, and what's the end game? And just, I don't know. I haven't really thought this all through, so I'm wondering if you have thoughts on what would happen in that sort of scenario.
Yeah. So it is hard to say, but there's a few sort of important points to think about. So one is that geopolitical power is naturally self-reinforcing. It's kind of like miners in the Bitcoin network, right? Which is that the largest countries in the world, let's say the US, Russia, China, they have more influence over things than other countries. But none of them, even the US, can do anything too egregious, because if the US does anything that gets 80% of the rest of the world offside, well, they're still the minority, right? So no, because it's all distributed like that, the US can make some moves, but it has to do things that at least some countries are willing to kind of back it up on, or that because there's always a shifting balance, right? So any country can exert some influence in some areas, but the more it tries to exert influence in other things, the more space some other country is doing its own agenda, right? So it does sort of play out like that. So as a country, the more that it went to war with cryptocurrency, the higher that raises the incentive for every other country to take the opposite side of the deal, right? If you are the US and you go, I'm going all out, I hate crypto, I'm going to do everything I can to stop it. If you're China or Russia, that like massively raises the stakes on, we're going to be a crypto haven. And like, because then all of the industry, all of the innovation, all of the technology will all flood into your country and boost your own economy and your own state of affairs, right? And because cryptocurrency is naturally based around the internet, and it is very decentralized and spread about, it has a way of finding its way into the little nooks and crannies. Wherever there is an opening, that's where it starts. That's where it grows. Because nobody's like this podcast, is an example of that, right? If you were like, well, look, we got to shut down cryptocurrency, so we got to stop education from happening. There's 1,000 YouTube channels about cryptocurrency. There's podcasts. People talk about it at meetups. There's people everywhere just going on with it. So there's no coordination. There's no consistent theme. It's like trying to fight the ocean. There's no way to just take a bucket down to the ocean and just sweep back the waves or anything. Like it doesn't work like that. So obviously a large country could do a massive amount of damage if they wanted to, but ultimately, cryptocurrency is anti-fragile, which is that the more pressure you put on it, the more it sort of hardens up and adapts, so that that same kind of attack won't work, right? So like, for instance, it was only, Bitcoin had problems with being sort of only semi-anonymous, so that some, governments could track on the blockchain who was doing what and whatever. And once the community became aware of this problem, and that the government was tracking people and so on, what did they do? They developed more anonymous coins like Monero and Zcash and Cash Fusion on Bitcoin Cash and different things like that, right? Or Well, Bitcoin was the largest coin. It had most of the market cap. So then, when the development team became a problem in that they were sort of blockading progress with the 1 megabyte block size limit, what happened? The market split up into all these other different coins, where now there's 100 dev teams all doing their own approaches, their own organizations, their own philosophies, or whatever, and the market just adjusts around among them, right? So in that sense, uh, cryptocurrency is kind of quite unstoppable. So that's point one, right? Point two is that, like we talked about before, the incentive is for everybody to join, and then sort of it's then in their incentive to spread it to other people. So if the US wants to go to war with cryptocurrency today, like we saw, up to 20 or 30% of their population already owns cryptocurrency, and that will be immensely unpopular. And that's not even just talking about 20% of everybody, but 20% of the people in the government who are the ones making the laws about this stuff, who are in the position to say, I think I'll just vote against this. Let's go to war with cryptocurrency stuff because I've got some Bitcoin and I don't want to, I don't want to sell it, right? So there's sort of just this constant opportunism, even within the system, of sort of defectors, right? Which is that any centralized thing trying to attack cryptocurrency, whether it's a company or a government, struggles with the fact that even as they ramp up the pressure, individual members of the system are silently thinking, yeah, but what if this doesn't work? I need to make sure I'm looking out for myself, it's sort of a coordination prisoner's dilemma. Uh, so then we've got the third point, which is that governments are busy. And I talked about this in the previous episode, number 20, about government control. I don't know if you watched that, but you might like that as well. But it's a point that you don't think about intuitively, but it's that even though governments are big, they've got a lot on their mind. They need to worry about the healthcare, they need to worry about education, they need to worry about infrastructure. There's political protests of all kinds, right? Like with lockdowns, we've seen that, or with Black
And
Lives Matter, or pandemics, whatever it is. Like, the Trump Capitol riots, or
yeah,
free
stuff.
Hong Kong, or there's a million things in the government, and everybody knows governments they're big, but they're slow and they're inefficient. They're not, quick and adaptable. So the government can say, look, we're going to crack down on cryptocurrency, and they're going to spend, a month thinking we're going to focus on crypto and, whatever they're going to do. But then eventually something else is going to come up that's going to be a priority. And then guess what? They're going to be focused on that, and the cryptocurrency community is still going to be focused on cryptocurrency. That the crypto community has every day to fight the battle for crypto, but
Uh-huh.
government only has one out of every 10 days to fight the battle back.
But it's
Less.
funny to say that because, like, the US government, how long did they try to ban alcohol for?
Prohibition. Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know the history of all that, but it was like 7 or 8 years, I think, or something, wasn't it? It was in the 20s, right?
yeah, I don't know. And then the other thing, like the war on drugs, that they throw in huge amounts of effort there, and they're still not doing a very good job. That's
Yeah.
another one of these anti-fragile things, right? People are the harder, the more difficult you make it, the price goes up, and then people are going to make more effort to circumvent the measures. Um, so it's interesting though, what you said is completely has panned out over 60 or more years, maybe. The war on drugs,
Yeah.
and probably a whole lot more. I don't know the history there. Um, but the government's still putting a pretty big effort into that.
It's not working though. I mean,
Yeah, it's not working.
ultimately, because like the US can be against cocaine or whatever, but like I've said many times on this show, I do not know for a fact. I don't have no personal experience in this regard, but I'm pretty sure that if you want to get high in the States, where there's a will, there's a way, right? And that's in the US. Like globally, there's a lot of places in the world where it's much, much easier than in the US. And that's for drugs, like let's even say hard drugs, that a minor, like what, 5% of the population maybe are super interested in. But in money, everyone is interested in that. Everybody uses money. So the if you can't fight something that, even 5% of people are willing to, adjust their life around, how are you going to fight something that 100% of people are willing to adjust their life around?
That is a very interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. Very interesting.
All right.
Yep.
Do you have do you have another scenario? This is
Those are
good.
the ones that I had jotted down that I just thought were just super interesting, and I wanted to pick your brain about.
Yeah. No, that was good. That was fun. I enjoyed that. So yeah, we've got just we'll move on and sort of get to the end of the show then. So I
Segment.
I do every meme of the week. I enjoy this. You got to have a bit of humor in your life. So this week's meme of the week comes from at Michaela Arrowet on Twitter, and she made a tweet, and the title is "Perfect Picture of 2021 Investors," and then the image is it's a cartoon of a cliff with the lemmings, the famous animals that all sort of mass suicide off cliffs, and they're all lining up and they're all running to the edge of the cliff. And then when they get to the cliff, instead of falling off into the water like you'd expect, they're all sort of flying up into the sky. And the caption is "What Lemmings Believe." So taken together, it's kind of the idea that in 2021, everybody has convinced themselves that if they all charge in with the herd and all dive off a cliff, well, they're all going to the moon, even though the reality is probably they're gonna crash and burn into the water. And I just felt this was so funny in the context of what we were talking about with the Bitcoin Miami context, in terms of Satoshi, pyramid, in terms of like AMC and GME, like the meme stocks that are going on at the moment, the whole crypto casino. It's just so funny that it is true that everybody is getting the sense of, oh, I can get rich or I can be the smartest one or whatever, when they're generally stampeding with the herd, and maybe they're gonna make or lose money. But the real crux of the argument is that the existing financial system is so screwed up that even no matter how dodgy AMC or GME stocks are, or cryptocurrencies, if they're volatile and have a lot of problems, they're still better than fiat currencies as the world financial system really melts down. And that's so anyway, this made me laugh. All right, cool. And then so just have pretty much the second last slide here. So you've listened to a few of the other episodes, so I guess you know the drill. There's a message to the community. Just I've got some listeners. They're interested in Bitcoin Cash. You know a little bit about crypto or Bitcoin Cash from your perspective, from your vantage point. What is the community doing right, wrong? What do they need to hear? Yeah.
Um, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to say on this, but I'll use it to plug that the little lecture that I
Yeah.
gave. Everything I said then, and correct me if I'm wrong, but everything I said about that is completely applicable to Bitcoin Cash. In fact, in the way that you've often said before, Bitcoin Cash is
Yeah.
Bitcoin. This is based off the white paper. Everything that I said, except maybe one or two slip ups, but um, and in the same way that the Bitcoin Cash is based on that white paper. So everything I've said there applies to this.
Yeah, so I'll put a link to that in the description. Do you know what the name of it off the top of your head, so people can search it up on YouTube if they're...
I think I put something really generic like intro to Bitcoin or intro to blockchain. I don't.
All right. Well, we'll put a link in the description there, and if you're listening to the audio feed of this podcast, you can just go on YouTube, search out the Bitcoin Cash podcast episode 21, click that, and then the link will be in the description box. But yeah, I do highly recommend it. That was how Oliver came on the show, was that I was watching his video and sort of saying, "Oh yeah, good job." There was a really good educational content, and I'm glad to see it, because that's the key point about this all, is that decentralization of information is the most unstoppable part of cryptocurrency, right? Is that, I don't know, like you were saying about those doomsday scenarios, the government, maybe it can stop me, maybe it can stop you, maybe it can stop someone else, but it can't stop everyone. So the word is getting out there, and we're seeing kind of the results of that. So yeah, just one last little bit of news for the podcast is that I had people, giving me feedback saying, okay, these episodes are pretty long. Like this one's going to be definitely well over 2 hours, which I don't mind because I like that it's a long sort of episodes. People can listen to them in segments, or if they're on their long commute or working out at the gym or whatever. I really like long podcasts, so I don't mind producing long podcasts. But on the other hand, sometimes you need just some short, sharp bits of info, and especially on YouTube and other platforms where people have short attention spans. A lot of bigger creators, they do chop up sort of the best of little 2 or 3 minute segments and put them up there as well for people who don't have all day to listen to this stuff. So I've created a new channel called BCH Clips. Again, link will be in the description. And if you've been following my channel and enjoying it, you can subscribe to that too and catch up on some of the hits from the previous episodes if you don't have time to watch them all, that kind of thing as well too. So that pretty much does it then for the show. So people can donate as ever, scan the QR code, peer-to-peer cash. It's all pretty easy. Thank you to all the donators on the previous episodes. Love you all very much. Really, really appreciate it. The slides and resources for the show are at bitcoincashpodcast.com. And yeah, is there anyone you wanted to shout out? Do you have, like, obviously that YouTube video will link to that stuff, but do you have anybody you want to mention specifically, or a Twitter handle that people can follow you, anything like that?
No, it just maybe do we want to shout out, if you're in London, you should come to the meetups there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the well, it was Cryptocurrency 101, but then it was 102. I don't know if we've had 103 yet, but that must be on the cards, this weekend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, come along and check out that group. Again, link will be in the description on meetup.com if you're in London and you want to chat to me or Oliver. I mean, I should be there. I guess I was going to go for a bike ride actually on Sunday, so I might end up missing this week. But I can highly recommend anyway this group. It's run by a guy called Will, and I've had a blast at the last 2 meetups, and really, it's a great spread of people. There's all kinds of, people from different industries. People have all their different favorite coins. I've talked to people who've been into mining, people that are more into trading, people who are more into sort of the philosophy of it, or, have the ideological reasons to be involved. And yeah, it's just always a good time. So head along and find a lot of other people in the same boat as you that are interested in cryptocurrency, right? It's a crowd that's getting bigger and bigger all the time. So yeah, that pretty much does it then, mate. Thanks for coming on the show, and till next time.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks, man.
He pulled out his laptop and bring up the site. Looked at me and said, this will change your whole life. Then he started explaining the basics to me. The miners make money by taking a fee every time a transaction is made and complete, and they work every minute and day of the week. A guy named Satoshi created this all. He's the mastermind of it, the brain and the balls. There's a lot more to say, but before I begin, just tell me right now if you're out or you're in.